What if the man Amy loved walked back into Hudson after years away, but he did not come for her? He came for the little girl who has his eyes. Before this day, Amy learned to live with quiet strength. When Ty left, the ranch kept moving. The horses still needed care, and the sun still rose over the hills, but her house felt colder. She tucked Lindy into bed each night and told simple stories about a brave father who loved wild country and good hearts. She chose her words with care, because hope can be a sharp thing. Some nights, Lindy asked why her dad could fix broken horses but not a broken promise. Amy had no safe answer. She would kiss her daughter's hair and say that some paths are long and hard, and sometimes people get lost on them. Then she would sit at the kitchen table with a mug that went cold and try to breathe through the chairs rolled by in small steps. Amy taught Lindy to ride the gentle gelding that Jack trusted. The child's laugh rose over the fields, bright as morning, and for a while that sound was enough to hold the pieces of the family together. Lou kept the schedule tight, dropping off meals, picking up chores, pushing away the silence with lists and plans. Jack watched with steady eyes and said little, but he was always there at the fence line, a fixed point when the wind picked up. They did not speak Ty's name each day, yet he lived in the way Amy checked the road at dusk, in the way Lindy traced a faded photo on the fridge with a small Fincher Amy carried work like armor. Every horse she calmed felt like one more step toward a life that made sense again. She learned to listen for storm signs in the animals and in herself. When a mare spooked, Amy steadied her voice. When a memory struck without warning, she steadied her hands. She told herself that love can change shape and still be true. Love can be duty. Love can be showing up when the morning chores are heavy and the sky threatens rain. She kept going because the ranch needed her and because Lindy needed a mother who did not bend in the wind. Lindy grew fast, quick with questions and brave with reins. She asked if her dad liked maple syrup or honey on pancakes. She asked if he smiled with his eyes. She asked if he could hear the coyotes at night from wherever he was. Amy answered what she could. She let the unknowns rest where they had to. On birthdays, they baked a small cake and set an extra plate. It stayed empty, but the chair was never pulled away. It was a simple act, a signal sent into the dark, a way of saying that the door was not locked. Hudson kept its own rhythm. The diner buzzed, the trails opened and closed with the seasons, and neighbors carried news across fence posts. When Ty's name drifted into a stray talk now and then, Amy felt the air pull tight in her chest. She kept her face calm for Lindy. She had made peace with the idea that some stories do not loop back. Yet even in her peace there was a thin thread that held. It glowed in the quiet hours when the house slept and the old floor creaked and the moon lit the photo on the fridge. In those hours, Amy whispered a wish she would never say aloud in daylight. Not for herself, not anymore. For her daughter, who deserved to know the sound of her father saying her name. The air was different that morning. Amy felt it before she saw anything. Horses are the first to sense change, and Spartan lifted his head from the pasture as if listening to something far away. Lindy tugged on Amy's hand, asking why Spartan seemed restless, but Amy could not find the words. She only knew the silence carried a weight it did not carry yesterday. The gravel road leading up to the ranch shimmered under the sun, and then a truck appeared, older, dusty, and slow. Amy froze as if her boots had rooted to the ground. The figure who stepped out was not a stranger, though years had carved his face and deepened his eyes. It was Ty's world did not move for a breath. Amy's heart kicked hard against her ribs, torn between the ache of old memories and the disbelief of seeing him in the flesh. She had pictured this moment in dreams, in quiet half-thoughts at night, but never like this. Ty stood at the edge of the drive, shoulders weighed down, hands rough and uncertain. He looked at the ranch as though it might push him away before he spoke a single word. His voice, when it finally came, was low, almost broken. He asked if Lindy was here. Jack came first, stepping out from the barn with eyes narrowed like a man who had seen storms return before. Lou followed, her face sharp with anger and relief tangled together. The family gathered, but the silence between them was thick, almost alive. Amy could not move, could not decide if this was a dream or a wound torn open again. Lindy looked from one face to the other, her brow furrowed with curiosity, her small hand tightening around Amy's. She asked in a whisper who the man was, and the question cut deeper than any. Bladdy stepped forward then, not toward Amy, not toward Jack, but toward the little girl half hidden by her mother's side. He bent down slowly, as though afraid his own shadow might frighten her. His eyes softened, and Amy saw something rough flicker there: regret, longing, and a desperate kind of hope. He said her name, just once, as if tasting it for the first time. Lindy. The sound was soft, but it carried like a bell through the yard. The horses stilled. Jack's jaw tightened. Lou crossed her arms, and Amy's heart cracked into places. At once, one for the man she had lost, and one for the father her daughter might finally find. The moment did not end cleanly. It stretched, fragile and trembling, like the pause before a storm breaks. Lindy tilted her head, uncertain but drawn closer, her eyes searching Ty's face as if she recognized him from the stories and pictures. Amy's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to reach out and hold her daughter back, to shield her from promises that might never last. But another part of her, buried and still beating, wanted to let the child step forward, to let the story begin again, even if it shattered her own heart in the process. The yard felt caught between silence and thunder. No one moved. Not Jack by the barn, not Lou at the porch, not even Amy, though her hands shook at her sides. The only movement came from Lindy, her braids swaying as she took one small step forward. It was not bold, not hesitant either, just the kind of step a child takes when something inside her says, "This belongs to me." Amy's breath caught because she knew this was not her moment to hold. It was. Lindy stayed low, kneeling in the dust like a man who had come to confess his whole soul. His eyes never left Lindy's. For years he had pictured her in flashes, what her laugh might sound like, how tall she'd be by now, if she still liked to ride ponies the way Amy once did as a girl. But the truth of her was more than any picture could give him. She had Amy's steady gaze, but the wild spark in her smile was his own. When Lindy stopped just a few feet from him, Ty's hand trembled against his knee as though he was afraid to reach too soon. "Are you really my dad?" Her voice was small, but it sliced through every shield Amy had built around herself. The question held no anger, no tears, just the simple, sharp edge of a child asking for truth. Ty's throat worked, his lips parting with a sound that broke in the middle. "Yes," he whispered. "I am." The words seemed to change the air itself. They did not erase the years of absence, but they cracked something open that had been sealed too long. Lindy studied him the way a foal studies a wide-open field, half cautious, half ready to run free. Then she lifted her hand, slow and testing, and touched his face. The calloused skin met her soft palm, and the smallest smile curved her lips. Ty closed his eyes, holding that touch like it was the only thing keeping him standing. When he opened them again, tears burned at the edges, but his voice carried steadier than before. "I've wanted to hear you say my name, Lindy. Just once." And she did. She said it with a shy grin, as though trying on a word that finally fit right. "Dad." Jack's face hardened, Lou's arms tightened across her chest, but Amy felt her whole world tilt. This was the moment she had imagined countless times, but in every dream she stood beside Ty, sharing the joy. Now she stood apart, a witness, her heart aching because the reunion belonged to them. Lindy leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. For the first time in years, Ty held his daughter, and the ranch seemed to exhale. Even Borden, watching from the fence, lowered his head as if the world had been waiting for this. Amy pressed her lips together, fighting tears, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. She had lost Ty once, but this was different. She was losing him a second time, not as a partner, but as the piece of her daughter's heart she no longer owned. Amy did not cry. Not yet. She stood as steady as the fence posts around her, but inside every board was splintering. Watching Ty hold Lindy should have been joy. It should have been healing. But all Amy could feel was the sting of being erased. For years she had carried the weight of both mother and father, telling bedtime stories about a man who might never return. She had been the one to wipe away tears after school when other children spoke of their dads. She had taught Lindy how to ride, how to trust her instincts, how to face the world with courage. Now, in one embrace, Ty had stepped into that space as if he had never left. The worst part was that Lindy's smile was pure. Her arms clung to Ty's shoulders with the kind of love Amy could never give alone. That joy was real, and Amy could not take it from her. But as she watched, it felt like the years of struggle, of lonely nights, of quiet victories, vanished in Lindy's eyes. Amy's heart whispered the cruelest question: was all her effort only a waiting room for this moment? A place where her daughter was simply waiting for her father to return. Maurice stormed in, uninvited. Ty at her side in the barn, laughing at a cold, stubborn kick. Ty's hand steadying hers as they gentled a horse that others had given up on. The promises he made by the fire when they were young and certain, those moments had been buried under duty, under grief, but now they rushed back with a force that nearly knocked her breath away. She wanted to scream, to demand why he had stayed gone so long, why he let her shoulder the ache alone. Instead, she stood in silence, every word trapped in her throat, because if she spoke, it might tear this fragile reunion apart. Her eyes burned as she caught Lindy looking at Ty like he was a miracle come true. That gaze cut deeper than any knife. Amy realized she was not just watching her past resurface, she was watching her place in her daughter's heart change. She was no longer the whole story, only half of it. Ty's return filled a gap Lindy had always felt, and Amy feared that in filling it, he might steal away the bond she had built brick by brick over the years. Jack shifted at the barn, his weathered face carrying sympathy but no answers. Lou folded her arms tighter, anger sharp in her eyes, but Amy knew her sister's fight was not hers to fight. This was her battle alone, inside her own chest. She had to choose between protecting her heart or letting Lindy's open wide, between clinging to the life she had built or allowing space for the man who had once held her soul. And in that moment, Amy understood that love does not always break with anger. Sometimes it breaks quietly, standing still while the people you love run towards someone else. Hudson was small, and news in a small town traveled faster than the river after a storm. By the next day, whispers carried through the diner, down the feed store aisles and across fence lines. Ty Borden was back. Folks spoke his name with surprise, with judgment, and with cautious hope. Some remembered him as the boy who turned into a healer, the man who loved Amy Fleming more than his own breath. Others remembered the leaving, the silence that followed, and the years of absence that hurt more than any injury. The town divided itself in quiet ways between those who wanted to see a family healed and those who thought Amy deserved better. Inside the ranch, the reactions cut sharper. Jack sat at the head of the table with his coffee cooling in his hands, saying nothing for a long while. He had been both father and grandfather to that little girl, and he had seen Amy break in the dark hours when no one else noticed. Now Ty was sitting across from him, older, worn, but not broken. Jack's eyes were steel as he finally spoke. "You're here now, but being here once doesn't mean much. It's staying that matters." The words landed like hammer strikes, but Ty didn't flinch. He only nodded, as if he had already told himself the same thing 100 times before walking up that driveway. It was different. Her anger spilled quicker, her voice sharp as barbed wire. She reminded Ty of every birthday he had missed, every night Amy had stayed up late alone, every time Lindy asked questions that had no good answer. Lou didn't care about explanations. She cared about the years that couldn't be given back. She warned him not to make promises he couldn't keep, not to light a spark in Lindy's heart only to let it burn out again. Beneath her fury was love for Amy and a fierce shield around Lindy. Lou was willing to fight, even if Amy's lips stayed silent. The neighbors had their say in subtler ways. A handshake held too long, a head shake at the diner door, a plate of pie offered without words. Hudson had watched Amy grow up, had seen her shoulder losses and still carry the ranch with quiet pride. They admired her strength, and though some softened at the sight of Ty returning, others crossed their arms and muttered that a man who leaves once might leave again. Every look Amy caught from a neighbor reminded her that this was not just her story anymore. It was being judged, measured, and weighed by the whole community. Yet in the middle of the noise, Lindy's laughter carried. She had spent an afternoon with her father, and it echoed through the ranch like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For her, the world was simple. Her dad had come back, and that was enough. But for Amy, for Jack, for Lou, it was not so simple. Every smile Lindy gave Ty deepened the divide between fear and hope. The family stood at a crossroad, and Hudson watched from the sidelines, waiting to see if this return would mend the cracks or split them open. For good evening light stretched long shadows across the ranch yard, painting the ground in gold and fire. The day had been heavy with words, some spoken and some swallowed, but now silence hung again. Amy stood on the porch, her hands gripping the railing as if the wood itself could steady her. Inside, the air still smelled of supper, but no one had touched much of it. Ty sat at the table with Lindy beside him, and the way she leaned close to him was something Amy had never seen before. It wasn't new love, it was recognition, as if she had been waiting her whole life for this moment and finally found the missing piece. Jack polished the rim of his coffee cup, his eyes fixed on Ty like he was reading more than his words, measuring the man's weight, testing if his roots would hold this time. Lou busied herself with dishes she didn't need to wash, the clatter of plates a thin veil over her sharp knees. Amy could feel the storm building, not outside in the sky, but right there in her home. She knew a question was coming, and she knew when it came, the answer would split everything open. It happened in the quietest way. Lindy looked up from the sketchbook she had been filling with clumsy drawings of horses and suns. She put her pencil down and turned to Ty, her small face glowing with an innocence that none of the adults in the room carried anymore. Her voice was soft but certain, the way children speak when they don't yet understand the weight of the world. "Daddy, are you staying this time?" The words hit the table like a stone dropped into still water. Every ripple spread outward. Jack's jaw locked, Lou's hand froze mid-wipe, and Amy's chest tightened so hard she thought she might break apart right there. All the arguments, all the doubts, all the unspoken fears had been gathered into that one simple question. A question no adult had dared to ask, but a child had put into the open without hesitation. Ty's breath caught, his eyes flashing with something between guilt and hope. He reached for her hand, holding it as if it were the only anchor he had. His lips parted, but no sound came. The silence stretched, heavy, unbearable. Amy's fingers dug into the railing until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to scream the answer herself, to protect her daughter from waiting for words that might never come. But she held still, because this answer could not come from her. It had to come from him. The room seemed to stop breathing. Even the horses outside were quiet, as if the whole ranch had paused to listen. Lindy's eyes searched his face with a trust that was almost painful to watch. Ty opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, the screen door creaked in the wind, and the sound carried like a warning. He hesitated, and in that hesitation lived every fear Amy had carried for years. Would he stay? Would he leave again? The question hung unfinished, burning the air between them. The story did not close that night. It ended in that silence, in that moment where hope and heartbreak balanced on the same edge. And as the evening shadows stretched darker across Heartland, Amy knew nothing would ever be the same again. The ranch lay quiet under the night sky, the stars sharp and bright above the rolling fields. From the outside, it looked like any other evening in Hudson. The horses shifted in their stalls, the dogs curled up by the porch, and the air carried the sweet smell of hay. But inside the walls of that old house, nothing was simple anymore. A family that had learned to live with absence now faced the weight of return, and no one knew if it would heal or destroy. Amy sat alone in her room, the window open to the cool breeze. She could still hear the echo of Lindy's question, circling in her mind over and over. "Daddy, are you staying this time?" It was the question Amy had been too afraid to ask herself for years. Her heart wanted to believe, wanted to let the hope bloom again, but her scars whispered caution. She had built her life on the strength of standing without him. Could she risk crumbling if he left again? In the guest room across the hall, Ty lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The sound of Lindy's soft breathing was the only thing that eased the storm inside him. He had held her for the first time, had felt her trust in his arms, and it broke him in ways he hadn't expected. He wanted to promise her the world, but promises were heavy things, and he knew the weight of them better than anyone. The truth pressed on him. Staying would take more than love. It would take courage to face what he had broken, to face Amy's pain, and to face his own. Jack smoked his pipe outside, the glow of the ember flickering against the dark. He had seen families bend and break, and he had seen them rebuild, but he knew this story was not his to write. He prayed Ty would choose right, but Jack's eyes carried doubt. Lou, pacing in her room, had no such faith. To her, Ty was a risk too great, and she swore she would protect Amy and Lindy, no matter what it cost. And then there was Lindy, asleep with a smile still resting on her lips, her dreams brighter than any of the fears the adults carried. In her heart, her dad was back, and that was enough. She didn't see the fractures or the shadows. She only saw love standing in front of her for the first time. It was a hope so pure it frightened Amy more than anything else as the night deepened. The ranch held its breath. Would Ty's return be the beginning of a mended family, or the spark that tore them apart again? The answer lived in the silence after Lindy's question, in the hesitation that still hung in the air. And until Ty spoke the truth, the whole of Heartland remained balanced on the edge of heartbreak, and healing's story was not finished. It was only just beginning.